Okay, so today I am going to talk about how Justin King, Beau of the Fifth Column, uses words, or specifically doesn't use words, avoids using specific words. I have mentioned this in the first video, so I kind of wanted to get on to that one. I think it's worth pointing out here that a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when I was still actually sometimes watching Justin's videos, he did say in a reply to a message he got or an email or something that he actually does avoid using specific words. And, you know, because someone had said they'd noticed that he uses less inflammatory words, you could say, words that are likely to upset people. And he said, yeah, I do that. And the way I know, and the reason I do that is because you tell me. So he said that, you know, he looks at the analytics, and when, you know, you can see from the analytics when a lot of people have stopped watching and switched off, and then he goes and watches that bit to see what might have made them switch off, and quite often it's a specific word that he's used. So he avoids using that word in the future. So he is very conscious of the words that he uses now for quite a long time. I knew this before that anyway, because a while before that he'd said that he doesn't use the A word as in anarchist. Like, he likes to make out that he's an anarchist. He's not, but that's what he likes to say he is. And he said he avoids using it because it scares people, because they don't really properly understand what it means. Okay, so he is very conscious of the words that he uses. He's told us this at least twice to my knowledge, okay? And I think I'm going to start with this one, but I think it's really important for you to understand what he's doing, for you to think about what he's saying exactly, to look critically at what he's saying, analyse what he's saying. What is he trying to tell you? Because he is trying to tell you stuff but hoping that you won't realise what he's trying to tell you, I think is it's the important thing that you need to understand here. Okay, so I'm starting with this video, which was only from yesterday. But it amused me quite a lot because there's a few things in that he's mentioned that I feel are quite pertinent in some ways. Anyway, let's. So this one, he's talking about applied international law. So in this bit, he's just explaining why international law doesn't really apply to the US. But the interesting thing is, he never actually says it doesn't really apply to the USA. Okay. But he's clear that that's who he's talking about.
Exactly. International law is the same way. Power and connections have a whole lot to do with how it gets applied or doesn't. On the international scene, money, yeah, I mean, it matters. Power coupons matter. But on the international scene, there's another kind of power that is more important in this math, and that's military power. The stronger a nation is militarily, the less international laws are enforced upon that nation, because they don't really have the ability to do it. Think of it as a country that has a very strong criminal enterprise going on, one that is stronger than law enforcement in that country. The laws really don't get applied to that organization because they have more power, right?
So I'm sort of intrigued by the way that he's saying that. So he is very clearly talking about the USA when he's talking about the military power. I find it quite interesting that he's sort of suggesting there's like a criminal element.
So you have that. And then you have connections. Connections meaning maybe in some country, if somebody knows a judge, they get favorable rulings. If you know somebody that has veto power at the UN, you might get favorable rulings.
So there, he's clearly talking about Israel getting the USA to use its veto power at the UN. He's clearly talking about that. He's not actually saying it. And he's avoiding saying it because he's trying to make it less real, except that it is real, if you see what I mean. He kind of doesn't... It's like he's trying not to say the quiet part out loud. I mean, people in Israel, the politicians of Israel, have been saying quite a lot of quiet parts out loud, frankly. And he's trying to avoid saying that. But he is basically acknowledging that the US has power here, even when, like, previously he's tried to say that Israel is, he has all the power in Gaza, they can't do anything, the US can't do anything. He's made it clear here that the US can do that on behalf of Israel, and they do it on behalf of Israel.
It's the same dynamic at play. Power and connections overrides the international norms, the international laws.
Okay, so I think, I do find it quite funny how he is trying not to acknowledge that, because I think he kind of has to, because basically everybody does know this, but at the same time he doesn't really want to say it, because, it's actually quite problematic. I think he says it's not good, but that's just the way it is. I don't think he's particularly inclined to change it. So let's go to this one.
Is not other countries saying, hey, you're breaking these international norms. You're violating this international law. You're breaking this treaty. That doesn't have much sway if you're talking about a country that has a lot of power and connections. What does matter is what happens at home. If the citizens of the country that are violating those rules, if they have an issue with it, they can curtail it. If they make that position known at the family dinner that occurs every 2 to 4 years in the United States, that can have a little bit of impact. And you can point to things where you've seen this play out. A good example would be Vietnam. There was a lot of upheaval at home, and it helped curtail the war, helped end the war. Did it end it completely? Not right away. But the discontent at home helped shape that, and it helped.
Okay, so what I think is quite interesting to note a few things that he says there. So now this family dinner that happens every 2 to 4 years, I was wondering what's he talking about there. So because it seemed like he might be talking about Thanksgiving, but he's also talking about the elections because they happen in November, a few weeks before Thanksgiving. So basically what he's saying there is that there has been so many protests across the country that it's actually affected how, the politicians are now getting worried about how people are going to vote in the next elections. Obviously, we've just had some, but they are very concerned about it. But again, he sort of doesn't really want to say that. He doesn't want to admit that to the level of protests that are happening. He's not using the word protest. There's no reason for him to not to say protest. There's no reason for him to not to say sit-in, which is, so there's been like these sit-ins all across in the USA. There's like a particular one that I'm thinking of is hundreds of Jews doing a sit-in at some important building in Washington, and they've, all wearing T-shirts that say Jews against genocide or something, Jews for a ceasefire. And, that all has an effect. And Now, I don't think the Jewish vote is that big in the USA, but it's always a concern. I think certainly from an outside perspective, it always seems like they're interested in the Jewish vote. That might be because they're interested in Israel. But yeah, I think that kind of thing, it really does have an impact. But he doesn't really want to say that out loud because it makes it more real. He doesn't want to acknowledge these stuff really. And it's really funny how he talks about upheaval and discontent. We've seen millions in the USA protesting across the USA, and he's barely acknowledged that in all of his videos, really, and he's still not really acknowledging it here. And because he, we looked at another episode, I'm going to bring it up again later, where he talks about talking to your representative about how you need to there's no point talking to your representative, you need to run your own candidates. Well, this has been a way of talking to their representatives. The protests have been a way of talking to their representatives. But he's obviously been trying to guide people towards like voting and stuff. It's so ridiculous. And bringing their own politicians in who will, serve your interests. So I think there were some other words I was particularly interested in. So let's go up to here.
But how it was lessened. You can look at unmanned aerial vehicles.
Unmanned aerial vehicles? What's he talking about there, huh? He's talking about drones is what he's talking about.
And how it was initially used, the outcry, and again, how it was curtailed, not stopped. There's the ability to mitigate that kind of violation of international law, but it has to originate with the people inside that country.
Yeah, so he's also said, violation of international law. I mean, he's admitting to that. That's quite funny. So there's this one here, which I find quite amusing.
Home helped shape that, and it helped bring about that conclusion. You can look at a notorious base in Cuba that the United States has. Well,
he means Guantanamo Bay. Now, I don't know if YouTube really flags up Guantanamo. Maybe it does. But it quite amuses me that he's talking about that. Because, when he says that, I'm thinking, well, how many people did you help put in there, Justin? When you were breaking international law. Helping kidnap people. How many?
Not stopped. There's the ability to mitigate that kind of violation of international law, but it has to originate with the people inside that country.
So, I mean, it's sort of like he's saying protest, but he's not saying protest. It's I just find the whole thing really kind of slippery. And I mean, he's basically acknowledging that basically the US does these bad things, but he won't kind of condemn the US for it or anything like that, or say that they shouldn't. He'll say it's like, this is how it is, this is how it can be mitigated. Anyway, and okay, so this one particularly amused me.
To complete the analogy, when the country is a cop, when the country is a nation that has a position in the world of keeping order in other countries, it gets to bend a lot of rules, kind of like an undercover cop.
So he's actually kind of saying it. Now, this is a thing that has been said for years about the USA. I mean, I can remember it being said when I was a teenager on BBC that the US was kind of like the world's policeman. And he's kind of admitting it there. But he's not really admitting that it's the USA specifically. He's sort of trying to avoid saying a lot of that because he wants to, a lot of it's about like trying to get people on side, but without like to make it look like he's being aware. But at the same time, he's not really saying the things that he should say. He's really avoiding it. And I do find the undercover cop mention quite amusing because the US hasn't been that undercover about it. It's been very blatant about how it regards itself as the world's cop. There are certainly undercover things they've done, stirring up trouble in South American countries, causing right-wing coups to get rid of democratically elected left-wing governments, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's definitely does things undercover, but there is nothing undercover about the fact that the US considers itself the world's policeman. I genuinely don't see anywhere Justin here saying that he thinks it's a bad thing, that, he'll say, the most he'll say is, I'm not saying it's right, but it's how it is. And that's kind of what he wants you to think. He wants you to think that this is how things are, it's how they always will be, nothing you can do about it. This is just the best way to mitigate things. He talks about mitigation a lot. When he was talking about the Vietnam War thing, he was talking about how the Vietnam War wasn't stopped immediately, but it was mitigated. The drones weren't stopped, they were mitigated. I mean, it's true, like obviously there are still drone strikes happening. There's still prisoners in Guantanamo Bay and so on. So to an extent, he's kind of correct. But at the same time, that's all he wants. He doesn't want things to change, not really.